What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mortgage Coach Tuesday interview. Super pumped. I have two amazing guests, and I have a topic that I'm just fired up about. So as my first guest, I have Andrew Paul, mortgage professional, top producer, team leader, branch manager, someone that I've interviewed before. One of my all-time favorite, Jocko. Andrew, thanks to you. I had that interview. So how's it going, my brother?
I'm great, man. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you. So for those of you that don't know Andrew, he is today a veteran advocate. He is now the chief of staff of Echelon Front, working with Jocko Willink and his other former Navy SEAL brothers. The topic of today is a podcast that Jocko did, podcast 174, Set the Standard, Become the Eminently Qualified Human. And it was just one of those things where it hit me. It was a Saturday, I think, that I listened to Jocko's podcast. I'm a fan. And I was just like, whoa, I got a lot of personal value from that. I realized just how much I need to do better at setting my own standards, how much I need to do better at setting the standards of my team. So it was a big personal improvement opportunity for me. And I wanted to bring it to the mortgage coach community, because I think it's an important podcast, an important message. To help me have this interview, we got Todd Bookspan. He almost needs no introduction in this community, founder of Win by Noon. What's up, Todd?
I'm so excited to be back from vacation, be back from a long weekend, and to reconnect with you, Dave. And then, of course, Andrew, it's always great to spend time with you. It's been way too long, and super excited for your new role and what you're doing with Echelon, and excited for this call.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, let's get into it. We might lose Andrew in the last 15 minutes. We've got an hour. Andrew, let's start with you, because this is an important, podcast, important message.
Yep.
Set the standards, become the eminently qualified blank. And why don't you share some of your takeaways, why you think this is important to mortgage professionals, and let's talk for 20 minutes on the podcast, and then let's transition into setting the standards as a mortgage pro.
Yeah, fantastic. So, in the military, the background is we have a system for evaluating and ranking people. And so, first of all, if you haven't listened to the podcast yet, I'm not going to rehash the whole thing right now, but you really should listen to this. It's cool because Jocko gives a really good background on it. But the bottom line is that in any organization, you have to have a system for evaluating everybody's performance. And what's also interesting, and just in general in leadership, all of these things scale. So we're talking right now about, it started with the Navy evaluation system, and then in the podcast, Jocko transitions into the Marine Corps evaluation system. And in the Navy evaluation system, it's basically a 2-page form that goes through these different traits and qualities and ranks people on a scale of 1 to 5. And it's good, and so we've used it for years. And there's some problems with it that really focus in on leadership and the lack thereof, really. But then the podcast goes on to, he's like, well, then I saw the Marine Corps evaluation system. And that's kind of where we're at right now, because the Marine Corps evaluation system is much more in-depth. It's a 6-page document that does a much better job at breaking out people in terms of their performance in various categories. And ultimately, it then creates like a Christmas tree structure, which is like on the last page of the evaluation. And so it's, it's a triangular form. So you've got most people are at the bottom, and then, it's almost like that food group thing, right? And then there's a few less people at the next rung on that Christmas tree. And you get to the very, very tip top of that Christmas tree looking diagram. And it's just like one, and it's the eminently qualified Marine. And so then the transition is to take an example from that into what the Marine Corps has done in creating this really robust system for looking at everybody. What about the eminently qualified human? And then Todd and Dave obviously were inspired by this podcast to say, okay, well, what does the eminently qualified loan officer look like? And so you have to start to define a standard. And that's the bottom line. Most people don't define any kind of a standard. And if there's one takeaway from this whole podcast, it's what is the standard? do you even have one? Or are you just meandering through life with these movable goalposts that, depending on how you wake up today, you kind of give yourself a thumbs up like, hey, yeah, I worked out today, or I made some phone calls, so it was a good day. But then tomorrow, perhaps the standard shifts. Like, how did you define whether you had success today or not? And so I think at the very sort of high 30,000 foot level is the biggest takeaway versus that you have to have a standard. And so what standard are you measuring yourself by? And then what standard are you measuring the people in your organization by? Now, there's probably a lot of people on this call who may just be a single producing loan originator. You might have a production partner or a loan officer assistant, or like in some systems, an LP1 or LP2 or something. So you might have somebody that works for you, but it might be one person. So there are some aspects that specifically are related to the Navy and the Marine Corps evaluation system that don't really apply, because it's meant to break people out in a scale, when you have maybe dozens or hundreds of people, to identify the top performers and the bottom performers. And that may not apply in that sense. But all of these things, what I've really learned over the years when it comes to leadership is it starts at your own level as the individual. Because if you can't lead yourself, how could you possibly lead somebody else? And if you just have one person working for you and you don't have the ability to build a relationship and lead that one other person, how could you even be expected to lead a team of 4 or 8 or 10? How could you even expect that of yourself, that you would do that with any level of success if your own personal life is a total disaster? And it doesn't even need to be a total disaster, but if you have no system for even measuring your own performance, how can you then go on to say to the rest of your team members, this is the standard by which we're going to evaluate success. This is what we're going for. So that's the big 30,000 foot takeaway, is that you have to have a standard to say, this is what excellence looks like. And most people don't. And there's an old saying that says, most people aim at nothing and hit it with remarkable accuracy. So
yeah, right. Yeah, so true. So guys, a couple things. If you're watching this in our Facebook group live, I've put a link down below to a collaborative note, Google note that I started for everybody that has a couple resources. It has a link to the interview, has a link to Jocko having Andrew as a guest on his podcast, has a link to the Marine report. And my goal here is that we'll have this collaborative document, and a couple of weeks from now, we will have some standards from this community, the leaders on this call and others, that really document what is the eminently qualified local mortgage advisor. And so participate, see the links down below. So Todd, anything you want to share or any questions you want to ask Andrew before we continue the debrief on the podcast itself?
It's funny because Andrew just nailed it with what my favorite quote was. Jocko said that you're never going to hit the target that you're not aiming at, right? I mean, I think that's really it. I mean, he says, are you middle grade? And that really resonated with me. I mean, so Andrew, you've been a branch manager in the mortgage space. Obviously, you've led yourself and your team. I mean, what do you view as kind of middle grade? And then what do you sort of see as some of the attributes and the standards that someone who wants to raise up the bar needs to have in place?
I want to answer that for you, Todd, a slightly different way, because you start to introduce the term middle grade, which Jocko talks about a lot now as he's going through the 6-page Marine Corps document. Middle grade versus how the high end is defined versus the low end, and this is more of a leadership point, which is that holding people to a standard, including yourself, is often really hard. And what really often happens, I saw this in the Navy, I see it in business all the time, and this is what happens. We have somebody in our organization who's a mediocre to less than mediocre performer. Like we've got some issues, and it's like they're not really doing that great, and we all kind of get around and talk about, okay, like we need to give this person some feedback, because we might be talking about letting this person go, but we can't just like let people go because they're not performing. We have to coach them up to a certain level. We have to train them. We have that responsibility, and maybe it's costly to hire and retrain people. So, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring this person in, and we're going to do a performance review, right? And we all agree, like, this person, because if we are going to get this person off the team at some point, like if they don't step up, they're going to be out, right? We have to create a paper trail so that from an HR perspective, at the very least, we can document that we have identified the weaknesses and given them an opportunity to correct them. And then here's what happens. We bring the person in. We're like, hey, come on in. We're going to have a little chat. We're going to do a performance review. They come in, and the conversation goes something like that, like this. Hey, man, I just want to sit down. I first really appreciate you being here on the team. You know, you've been with us here for a while, and you know, you're doing good work. You're doing good work. There's just maybe one little area here that we'd love to see some improvement on, but you know, other than that, like, just keep it up, and appreciate you. You know, and it's like this sugar-coated, like, nobody will go right to the point and say, you are not hitting the standard right here. And so what happens is that person leaves the meeting, and all they heard really was that they're appreciated and they're doing a good job. And they're like, cool. So, you know, that person goes back to their workstation or back to their work. And, you know, why would that person ever change what they're doing? All they heard is they're doing a good job and you appreciate them being there. So there's no real motives for change there. And so, so this lack of leadership, like, sort of fortitude, not to be a dick, okay? You don't need to be a jerk to people, but if you don't define the standard and say, this is where you are in this spectrum, you're not doing them any favors. You're not doing the organization any favors. I mean, like, it's really actually kind of sad that you sent someone along their way thinking they were doing just fine, and then a month later you fire them, and then they're really wondering what happened. You've actually done a disservice to them. So when you talk about the middle ground, back to your question, Todd, like, there's this tendency to want to give everybody a positive review because we all want to be liked. And the reality is that we have to define the whole spectrum and have the fortitude to define, you know, where you are on that, to tell the people who are really kicking butt that they're doing great, and the people who are just hitting the standard, hey, you're hitting the standard. Good job. You collected a paycheck today. Thank you for being here. But don't high five them and tell them they're rocking if they're not, you know?
So contrast that to your time as a Navy SEAL. I mean, how often did you guys have these reviews, and then how, you know, direct and transparent were they with you about where they thought you were?
You know, we did them all the time, but don't think for a second. So it's once a year, and then there's a midterm sort of review as well. But you get really like an annual, but you're doing it in between. But the reality is, I mean, I'm gonna just tell you, we tended to be in the SEAL teams either way over on one spectrum, like, you're doing a good job, and they're like, you are all jacked up. What the hell's your problem? I mean, there's like this really like caustic approach at times. And then there's this other, like, what I just described, and we did that in the SEAL teams all the time. But they were good leaders. The good leaders developed the ability to effectively communicate to a person what they're doing well and truly what needs improvement, while not beating them down, right? So understand that sugarcoating it isn't the answer. That's usually a person's attempt to hold a standard while not beating them down. But if you're not direct about where they're missing the standard, you're not doing them any favors, and you're not doing your team or your organization any favors. And in the SEAL teams, like any organization, there were officers and senior enlisted who did this very well, and there were those who didn't. So there was no sort of like, oh, we all just did this amazing. No, that we all have to get better at that, including in the SEAL teams.
Yeah, I've got
hey guys, so
different. All right, Dave, jump in.
Well, no, I just wanted to, you know, make sure there's a document that I put together. I started it talking about because Jocko in the podcast referenced the United States Marine Corps document. So there's an area for quotes and standards.
Yep.
Think about, I would recommend every mortgage coach really deep dive into that, become one with it. You know, read the standards document. I put a link to that in the group. It's also in the document. You know, go through the way they organized it. You know, starts with mission accomplished. Next, number 2 is character. Number 3 is leadership. Number 4 is intellect and wisdom. And I don't say that to say that, hey, when you're creating yours for yourself and for your team, you need to follow that. But I do think you should study this report. And so just want to make sure you guys are following along in the document. Andrew, one quick question before you, and I do want to transition the next no more than 10 minutes into just like, let's build out for the mortgage industry, you know, how you would organize that. Todd, how you would organize that. But when you look at those categories, which one stands out to you as the most important?
In the Marine Corps evaluation system?
Yeah.
Leadership. I mean, because to me, that it starts there because but don't misunderstand. I mean, as you look at this, all these other traits, I mean, they're in here by design. They weren't just made, you know, they're not creating 6 pages of document for the heck of it. These are very carefully thought out. But if you want to ask me to pick one, I say leadership. And the reason I say that is because I think you can take leadership and apply it to all of those other categories. You know, if I had to pick one. So
yeah, no, I'm with you.
Leadership, how do I lead myself? I mean, so you could argue that. I mean, I'm not trying to argue the quality or the thought process behind how they did these, but I think if you ask yourself about leadership, and I'm not talking about like commander level CEO leadership. I mean leadership all the way down the chain of command, the middle managers, the team leaders, and yourself leadership. So you can apply. So there's a section on individual character, right? I mean, I think you can apply the mindset of leadership to your individual character and all those. So I say leadership.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I felt the same way. And obviously when you guys hear Jocko go through these, you know, that is what it's all about. And to your point, you can't have all of them if you don't first have leadership. You could have performance. You could have a great month, a great quarter, and not have good leadership. But you can't do it in a sustainable way, and you can't do that in a way that I think we'd all be proud of. So Todd, any other questions or comments? And then let's transition this and really unpack and help document what is the eminently qualified local mortgage pro.
You know, I would just highlight what Andrew just said, because I agree with both of you that leadership is where it starts. And I think a lot of people, when they hear it, think, well, I'm leading a crew and leading a team. And I think what you said, Andrew, it starts with self-leadership, and think about how you leading yourself and having the discipline with yourself, how it impacts all these other categories. Because ultimately, in the end, you know, that's where it starts, right? I mean, even if you're not leading a team, you've got people sitting outside of your door or outside of your cubicle in your office, and they're watching what you're doing. They're watching you have these other pieces. So they want to see that you're doing what you say, that you're actually getting up, coming in and doing your job versus, you know, sitting there shooting the breeze all day, surfing Facebook and Instagram, and then not actually getting those things done. And so that's where I went to. So I love that part, but I think you have to highlight exactly what Andrew said. That if you're not leading a team, it's okay. It's self-leadership precedes team.
Absolutely. And the key with it, again, the 30,000-foot takeaway on all of this is that it's not some amorphous moving standard that juggles around based on how you're feeling that day or depending on how the day comes at you. You define that. And so really, you should have a written standard. Without a written standard in black and white, the standard is going to move around. It's just, that's human nature. You're going to do that. So if you write out the standard, like there's no arguing at the end of the day if I look at like what my standard for the day was and whether I met it or not. And it's okay, you're not going to hit it every day. That's just human, okay? But it's not up for argument because it's written right there. So you've got to have a written standard. By the way, I just want to tell you kind of a funny anecdote here. Dave, I think it's awesome that you found the Marine Corps evaluation system and you've posted it here for, I don't know how many thousands people are on, 800 or 1,000 people are listening right now. But y'all are lucky that Dave just gave you the fish rather than teaching you how to fish, because having a little insight now into, you know, being on the team at Echelon Front and in Jocko and Leif's world, can I just tell you how many times people ask the same question of Jocko? Like all the time. Like he's literally gotten the, hey, where on the podcast you were talking about this evaluation form, where can I get it? He's literally been asked this question like 100 times. And he responded to one of them on Twitter, and I about fell out of my chair laughing. So this guy says, hey, where can I find this form? And he goes, hey, just Google it and then give yourself a 1.0 in initiative. I mean, I was like, damn. All right. Well, there you have it. So
I love that, man.
And I will tell you, so initiative is massively important. Golly, man. I mean, some people have it, some people don't. And somebody got to figure out what motivates people to take that initiative. But in the Navy eval form, really quickly, it's one of the sections and areas of evaluation. It's defined a little bit different in the Marine Corps one that Dave has given to you. But what's really special about it, and in the podcast, Jocko talks about this, is that most people get focused on it's a 1 to 5 scale in the Navy. In the Marine Corps, it's different. It goes from A to G, so it's a little bit more of a spectrum. But in the Navy system, it's 1 to 5, and he talks about this. And, when we ask for feedback on a loan that we've closed, we ask a client, how do we do, scale of 1 to 10, 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10. So people start focusing on, why didn't I get 5 stars, right? A Yelp review or whatever. Why didn't I get 10 stars? And that's not the point of this. The point isn't to get 10 out of 10. Actually take the time. And he gives a really good story about how he was counseling one of the guys that was working for him who was upset that he didn't get sort of 5 out of 5 stars. What the Navy and the Marine Corps system does a really good job at, and we'll transition here in a moment, but it actually defines what it means to get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or an A through a G. What does perfect look like? What does hitting the standard look like? And what is the minimum? Like you're allowed to be employed here. You're in the business if you're doing this. So that's really so don't think of it as getting 5 out of 5. It's a spectrum deal. But in the Navy eval system under initiative, the maximum rankings is energetic self-starter, completes tasks or qualifications early, far better than expected. Plans, prioritizes wisely and with exceptional foresight, seeks extra responsibility and takes on the hardest jobs. That's a 5.0 in the Navy system. And I see this all the time in the mortgage business. People in Facebook groups and whatever, they will literally ask me stupid, easy questions that they could have easily looked up themselves. I don't mind helping people. I really don't. I enjoy it. I want, for example, in my business in particular, I'm 95% VA as a veteran. I'm focused on serving mostly veterans. I have a really deep knowledge of nuances to the VA program. So people ask me questions all the time. What really kind of pisses me off, honestly, is when they ask me a real stupid question. And I mean something that is rudimentary easy. It's clear they did not even try to find the answer themselves. They didn't even, it obviously did not even try. So that's to give yourself a 1.0 in initiative, dude. And really don't even contact me again. Now, if you come to me and you're like, hey, so I was reading in the 26-7, raise your hand silently right now if you even know what the 26-7 is, okay? Most of you probably don't. But I'm reading in the 26-7. That's the VA manual. It defines all of the guidelines for the VA. I was reading in the VA manual, the 26-7, and over in chapter 4, it talks about trailing spouse income. And in that section, it says this. And I was reading it. I just didn't really understand if it would apply to this scenario. What do you think? I'm like, awesome. I've got a partner here who's they've tried to do the research, and they're just asking for some experiential help. I'm help you all day long. And if it's not clear, I'll call in favors and people I know inside the VA to help you get the answer. But when you say to me hey, I've got somebody who's in boot camp right now. Can he use a VA loan? I'm like, dude, come on, man. That's I don't have a license. Can I do a loan? I'm like, okay, no, you can't. So anyway, so just kind of on initiative, that's a big one. And I just was kind of laughing because Jocko crushed this guy on Twitter. And it was just yeah, go ahead and Google it and give yourself a 1.0. 1.0, ready for this one? Needs prodding to attain qualification or finish the job. Prioritizes poorly, avoids responsibility. That person will never be on my team, just so you know. So there you go.
Love that. Little Andrew Paul getting after it, man. Love that on initiative. So let's transition into building out your own set the standards document as a mortgage pro. And I know, Andrew, when you and I were talking, you kind of started that project how long ago? You know?
Actually, it was 2012 or 13. I pulled up some of my original ones. And what's so funny is that Jocko just did this podcast, and I thought, I actually did this on my own about 7 years ago. And I was looking for a way to evaluate the people on my team. And so what did I do? I went to what I knew. I went to what my experience was. And so I pulled out the Navy evaluation system, and I reworked it. I copied it and pasted it into a Word document, and I redefined the categories. I kept a lot of the same categories because a lot of them still applied. They were good categories. But in the definitions of what it meant to be a 1.0, a 2, 3, 4, or a 5, which is ideal, what you're shooting for, I rewrote those descriptions to apply to the mortgage business. And since then, I haven't done, like in the Navy one, it's like exemplifies the Navy core values of honor, courage, commitment. I tweaked that to be like, exemplifies the core values of, and I put in what our core values were of our company, is this, so I did this like 6 or 7 years ago, which is kind of fun. And I used that to evaluate the people on my team. And here's the other thing. How can you really hold somebody on your team accountable to anything if they have no idea what they're being held accountable to? So I encourage you all to have a written standard, not just for yourself. It starts here with number one, because if you can't do it with number one, you can't do it with number two, and so on. Have a standard that you can hold yourself to, and then have a standard that so everybody knows what they're being graded on. Like, how would you like to work for somebody who just sort of arbitrarily tells you whether you're doing a good job or not based on some, who knows, however that dude felt when he walked in the office today? That's bull stuff. You know that? I mean, that's crap. That's an HR freaking lawsuit waiting to happen, and you're just not a leader. You're just some dude with a title who managed to get a bunch of people to work for your company. So have a standard for yourself, and have one so that other people know what they're hitting for. How can they even work for you and try to? You may have people on your team who would love to do a great job for you, but they're running off in a direction that doesn't work because you haven't given them the guidance to say, this is the direction we're going in. So you got to have a written standard. And, one of the things we talked about, Dave, was, so Jocko, out of this podcast, is working on, we are working on something called the eminently qualified human. It's a standard at the 5.0 scale level, and it's like unattainable, but that you strive for. And no real details on that, other than to say that in talking about it and thinking about it, Dave, we were talking about this earlier. In the Navy or the Marine Corps, please read through these, because there's some really, really good verbiage to describe what it means to perform at an extremely high level. Read through those. You'll get a lot of inspiration in ways to define what you want that to look like for your life. But it would be unfair in creating sort of the eminently qualified human to say that, well, to get a 5.0, you have to be running a marathon. Or to get a 5.0, you have to be able to deadlift, 500 pounds. There's a lot of people out there who it's like, weightlifting is it's not a standard for them at all. I think we can all argue and agree that being in physical shape is in there somewhere, and being the eminently qualified human. Eating healthy and skipping the stuff that we know is bad for us, like sodas and sugar stuff. Like we might say, 3.0, middle of the road, is routinely exemplifies the discipline to skip dessert at a sit-down dinner. I mean, I'm just sort of inventing that right now, but like, my point is that you need to define for yourself what that standard is. There's a certain framework that we can all agree is within a topical standard, but I don't know that we can necessarily say that it's deadlift 500 pounds. If you in your path are into Olympic weightlifting, then yes, maybe deadlift 500 pounds is the 5.0 standard that you're trying to go for, or maybe it's to work out 6 days a week. So as you start thinking about creating a standard for yourself, creating a standard for your team, there's a lot of room there. In the Navy and in the Marine Corps, we can say, like, this is the standard for the Marine Corps based on the mission to serve our country and how the mission of the Navy or how the mission of the Marine Corps is defined. But that's an organization that has a specific tasking. Yours is going to be different, but you can certainly have a lot of very common qualities and traits that are listed in this evaluation system. So I hope that makes sense. Does that, Todd, Dave? I mean, is that
totally? You're killing it, man. So let's do this, because I hope you can stay the whole hour. But if you have to go 15 minutes early, just raise your hand and let me know.
Yep.
I want to do this. I want to start creating a list of standards for a mortgage professional. For example, prospecting. Depending on the level of business you want to do, there's a certain amount of calls, people you need to talk to, you need to meet. I've interviewed enough top performers to know that if you're prospecting, like truly getting after it, calling new people, and you're doing that 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, 90+% of the time, you're gonna be pretty successful.
Yeah.
Depending on how efficient and effective you are with how you're targeting and the quality of the conversations you have. I mean, you could become a $100 million producer with that type of commitment. And again, you could also be a $20 million producer, but you know what? You're not going to be a $10 million producer. I mean, if you are getting after it 2 hours a day prospecting, you're going to do really well to, Hall of Famer in the mortgage business.
Well, we can all argue that you have to prospect. Like, that's not up for debate.
Exactly. You need to get after it.
So prospecting is in there somewhere.
But the
exactly
challenge is that I don't think people, although they would say it's a standard they have, I think that if you survey the people on this call, there's a very large percentage who don't prospect every day, right? I mean, I think that's the piece, and I think that's where I love this conversation, Dave, that you started around this standard, because in the end, that's, you already said, Andrew, that you're not going to hit it every day, but you may not hit 2 hours of prospecting, but did you hit 30 minutes of prospecting? And then you already said it, Dave, some people want to be a $100 million producer, some want to be a $30 million producer. So it's not one size fits all, but you've got to sort of figure it all out, right? Success leaves clues. And it's easy to say. I love that you talked about health for a minute there, Andrew, because that's really awesome. I mean, you look at people like John Downs and Josh Metal, and years ago when we were masterminding, they were talking about, hey, this is the minimum hours, my minimum standard for my sleep, right? I mean, there's like the top performers have that. So I loved hearing that part too. But I don't know. I think that's the biggest thing where you've got to look at it. And, that's where I took the, are you middle grade, right? Are you going to reach your potential? And I just think there was days where I considered myself a middle grade loan officer just because I came in and I never did those standard activities, even though I knew I had to, even though I might have thought or said I did, I didn't really do it every day.
Yeah, no, so true. Well, let's do this. I have a question for you, Andrew.
Yeah.
I'm really going to ask everybody on this call the same question. If there were 3 standards that you needed to have in order to achieve your mortgage goals, what would they be? I know, last week or last year or last month, I did the contest where whoever made the most calls and did the most total cost analysis wins. So I'm Mr. Mortgage Coach. I think, making lots of calls, hitting your prospecting standard. I think when you show up for a family to deliver a mortgage coach total cost analysis is essential. And then when it comes to number 3, I could go all over the place, but here's what I want, guys. I want you to list your top 2, top 3 standards that you think will drive your success as a mortgage professional. So we're not talking personal, home. I want you to document those. I want to do that together. But right now, I want you to put in, what are your top standards as a producer to achieve your mission? And again, people on this call, there's going to be some people that have the mission to do 30 million. Some people do 100 million. Everybody wants to go to the next level. What's your mission and what are your top things? And then Andrew, because you already put in some standards, could you just give us a high level description of the standards you put in when you were, doing it for your team and you were transitioning from being full-time Navy to full-time mortgage?
Yeah. So the one that I created was, it was less around production, because it was more focused on like the team members that were on my team, where I was more of like the lead producer. So it was kind of more around that. It was less on specific production goals per se. I have a different set of goals that, from a coaching program for my own production. So the things that I put in there though, like that kind of make sense are, like professional knowledge, and again, I borrowed some of these things from the Navy eval system. So the personal trait was professional knowledge, so technical knowledge and practical application. And this could go as it would apply to a loan officer, a processor, production partner or a loan partner. So, 1.0 below standards was marginal knowledge of job, unable to apply knowledge to solve routine problems. Whereas on the high end, it's recognized expert sought out by all for technical knowledge. Meet standards, which, again, you got to take your head out of the 5.0 Yelp review ranking system, right? Because like on Yelp, guys, unless it's a 5.0, you suck, right? We all know a 4 on Yelp is, oh crap, I'm screwed now. Nobody's going to do any business with me because I got a 4. That's not what this is, okay? There's got to come a 3.0. You're doing your job. Meet the standards. Okay, that's not 3.0 is not bad. 3.0 Yelp review is bad. The 3.0 in the eval system is not necessarily bad. Okay, you're a good person at your job, right? So it meets the standards. And so what I put in there was strong working knowledge of job, loan guidelines, compliance, pricing, loan programs. Reliably applies knowledge to accomplish the tasks. And, you can have people who know a loan guideline, but they don't understand some of the compliance requirements around it, So there's a lot of pieces that you can get into that. So, those are some of the things that I put in there. And then, teamwork, super important, reinforces others' efforts, meets commitments to the team, understands goals, employs good teamwork techniques, accepts and offers team direction. Some people are just really focused on getting their own personal work done and punching out and leaving. I've got multiple people on my team helping support my production, and one person's taking longer lunch breaks than others, where other people are like, oh, we got a new loan, we got new contract came in today. I've got this one, they're checking with the other teammates going, do you want me to take this one and get it worked up? That's a really good team member, right? So those are some of the things that I put in there.
Love it. And Andrew told me that he would share this, so we'll put a copy in it. And at the end of the day, while Todd and I are going to work together to come out with a document, it'll probably be a Google document that we think is a good outline of things to consider to be the eminently qualified local mortgage advisor. So stay tuned. Within a couple of weeks, we'll have something that we fine-tuned, but we want to do that collaboratively with you guys. And my hope is that everybody will come out of this. You'll be a little more clear on your standards. Trust me, when Jocko comes out with whatever he's going to come out to be the eminently qualified human, I will post that in the group. Although from Andrew's position, I hope you guys will have the initiative to know it before me. I hope you guys will follow Echelon Front. You'll follow Jocko, and you'll get better on your own. But do know that I'm a fan, and we will be sharing this. So, Andrew, how are you looking on time? Do we only have you for 6 more minutes?
Yeah, I'm totally fine. Yep.
Okay.
Good. I want to add something to this too, Todd.
Go ahead.
Todd, Dave, real quick. The Marine Corps evaluation system fitness report is it's so good. And I mean, the hour plus podcast goes through each and every section and reads each of those. So it took an hour plus just to read through it and read each section, how each one of those traits are defined at the low, middle, and high ground of the range. Think about how long it took to put all that together. And what I know is that oftentimes it isn't about the destination, it's about the journey. And so if you take some time and start to, Dave is challenging you guys right now to ask yourself, how would we define the eminently qualified local mortgage originator? And what are the character qualities of that person? Rather than racing to sort of fill in the blanks and say, I've got one, sit there and think about it. What is it about the consistency of the prospecting? Does it have to do with relationships and how they treat people? Is the production number, is that a number? Is it within a certain range? As you go through, it might be the first time you've ever really sat back and thought about what does it really mean to be good at this job? And all I know is that regardless of what you ultimately decide is on the sheet of paper at the end of this, the process of going through and thinking about the different character qualities and how you define those is going to really shed some light in ways I think you've probably never done before. What I think could be pretty cool is that everybody's going to think critically about this in slightly different ways. And so, Dave, if you've got some forum where people start to create the different traits and then how those are defined, I know other people are going to look at those and go, gosh, I didn't even think about that part of it. Balance is relational time with social media. I don't know, right? Or I'm screwing around on Twitter and Instagram, so I don't know. My point is that everybody who starts to think about this, somebody's going to have an idea you didn't think about. You're like, ooh, that needs to be incorporated into my standard. I didn't even think to put that in there. And so that collaboration, I think, will be really valuable. So, Dave, if you've got some forum where people can post different performance traits and how you would define success along that spectrum of each trait, I think people will get a lot of value out of what other people have to say about it. So.
Yeah, no, I love that, Andrew. And yeah, mortgage coach community, we're gonna talk about this for a few weeks. There will be more posts in the group. Right now I have posted this collaborative document. Hopefully we'll get some feedback and ideas, and then we'll be fine tuning it. So Todd, let's transition to Todd Bookspan, guys. And I want to tee Todd up this way for everybody in the call. So first of all, for those of you who don't know Todd, some of you might have forgot, this is a guy who ran a team that did 500 plus loans a year. I mean, that is like crazy, so he's been a high performer in our space, a guy who's been a coach, was a building champions coach. Now he's full-time founder of Win by Noon. And Win by Noon is it's a playbook of some of the standards that top performers do that help you track that stuff. So Todd, I know you and I, we both listened to that podcast and we're like, holy crap, we gotta talk about this. And then we thought of having Andrew on this call. And we're like, oh my gosh, how amazing does that make this call? Having Andrew Paul, really walking through it, making it valuable. But where do you want to take this, Todd? Because we've got about 15, 18 more minutes. And then I know we want to, 2 weeks from now, we want to have some goods for the community. So where do you want to take the call for the next 18 minutes, brother?
Well, I mean, first off, I want to say thanks to Andrew, because I think what you did, Andrew, is you highlighted the standards in a different way. You said, hey, I didn't do this around production numbers and prospecting time. I just about how I wanted the character and the values and the culture of our team to be. And I think that's a really great reminder for all of us. It was a really good reminder for me, because I always go to the whole idea that the mission as a loan officer is to close a loan, right? It's a numbers game. And that's absolutely what Win by Noon, is. It's a tool that helps someone reverse engineer what are the activities that I need to do in order to have the result that I want, which is a closed loan. And, you mentioned, Dave, the Mortgage Coach Productivity Challenge. You did the 30-10 challenge, right? And so I'm going to call out Bliss. I don't know if she's watching, and I apologize in advance because I don't have her permission for this, but I think she'll be okay with it. Is that Bliss was the winner of the competition. She did 897 calls over 30 days, which is incredible.
Wow.
And afterwards, she said, hey, I got to just notch this down a notch. And in one of my Win by Noon groups that I have, we're doing an 8-week challenge. And so Bliss is part of that 8-week challenge. And she posted in the group last night. She said, I need a little bit of motivation. And what was interesting about it is that she's not doing as many calls. She committed, hey, I'm gonna do less calls for this month. But, she showed week 1, and then it's got week 2's numbers and week 3's numbers. And her week 2 numbers were 1/3 higher than her weeks 1 and weeks 3 numbers. And guess what? Her results were 1/3 higher in week 2 than they were the other week. So it's kind of that whole idea that success leaves clues, meaning, she made X number of calls and she got Y number of applications, right? When she increased the number of calls, guess what? She got more applications. It's not that difficult. And I think if you don't take the time to actually record those activities to figure out what is it that's leading to the results, and I think if you don't take the time to say, how did I do this week? And, Andrew said it, you're not going to crush it every week, right? You're going to set a high standard for yourself. I mean, Bliss's standard for the month of April was too high to sustain, right? She couldn't do that, day in and day out. But, if you look at Dave's doc, he has 2 hours of prospecting in there. And if you look at, big producers in our community like Josh Metal, I mean, he has a discipline, a requirement that is what they do every day as a team. Every day their team is from 9 to 11, prospecting. And so for me, I always go back to that, Dave. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but in the end, we know, and right, the people who do more TCAs are the bigger producers. It's not it's not like over like rocket science to think through. It's just a matter of really people taking the time to have the discipline to say, okay, well, what does that look like? What would be for someone doing TCAs, Dave, in your mind, like a 5.0? Is that someone who does the 10 a week that you put in the challenge? Is that a different number? You know, I'm not sure, but in the end, I think it's a matter of taking the time to listen to the personal traits, the character traits that Andrew walked through. And then I think that it's going to be critical if you're going to focus on production and not being, you know, Jocko said, how much are we leaving on the table every day? And that's, you know, I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I was doing, you know, I was doing a fair amount of loans. I was doing about 200 loans. I still felt like I wasn't reaching my potential. And so it was like a matter of how do I shift gears and get there? And that's sort of when, you know, those of you know my story, the Win by Noon stuff took off. But that's where I go, you know, as boring as it sounds, and as rudimentary as it sounds, when we look at standards in the mortgage space, you know, I'm looking at, hey, what are those activities? What are those results? Am I recording those and taking time to review it? And, you know, that's the Win by Noon story.
So two things, guys. So one, you know, while this call is all about documenting the standards, Todd, you know, introduced the concept to be your best. You've got to track it. You know, you've got to, you know, keep score of what you're doing. And then Todd, to answer your question on the, you know, what do I think a 5.0 mortgage coach is? You know, I mean, Bliss went to 6.0, you know, but 5.0 to me is consistency. You know, every family gets the best experience you could deliver, both as a human being. Ask great questions. It's not about technology. It's about what are their hopes, their dreams, and their goals in a very, you know, authentic, emotional way. And then, you know, put that into a total cost analysis and show that family member how they can, through making a mortgage decision, achieve both their short-term goals and their long-term goals. So that's 5.0. And then I think, you know, annual reviews, you know, having a checkup once a year, whether or not you actually get on the phone and have a 15-minute conversation, I think that's great. But that you reached out to the family annually and you attempted to deliver a strategic mortgage review. I mean, to me, that's 5.0. You know, for Bliss to win the contest, and, you know, she did the 800 calls, she did the, 86 TCAs. She had to do those two things. And then she also had to go to her pre-approval funnel and do more TCAs. But, you know, I think, you know, whatever your standards are, guys, consistency of execution is critical. And then you introduced a new concept, which is, well, not new, but in this call, you know, you got to document on the front end, you got to document on the back end, and then you need to reflect on how you're doing. Andrew, any thoughts from what Todd just said?
Yeah, I think you know, it's harder to focus on raw numbers because everybody's at a different level. So you know, in doing this, try to define what it could be for you, right? I mean, there are some people who are teams, and so their numbers sort of roll up in there. And so, you know, one person might say it's 1,000 TCAs. I would say it's a percentage, you know. Right, because that can scale. I mean, that's just sort of what I'm thinking about. Consistency is a massive portion of it, but I think that's where you define that standard, and then you have a way. And look, all the good coaching companies, you have a tracker, and you're looking at, you know, are you hitting that standard every day, every week? The biggest takeaway I took from what Todd said was a reminder about what Jocko said, or what are you leaving on the table, and that's particularly relevant right now, especially if you listened to my Memorial Day message. I've been saying for years, as I've reconciled the loss of my friends in combat and what my life has looked like after the military, there are times of sadness when I think about the loss of my friends, and I think about when I wasn't there for Mikey's death in particular, or it just guilt, or it's in the past, and I'm in a different phase of my life. And I can either choose to dwell there and be held back there, or I can choose to move on and move forward and to make something out of the life that I do have. And I ultimately came, and now, and I'm not saying I invented this, and you hear a lot of people saying this. I think it's more of a groundswell, you know, but I've been saying for years, it's how I live my life on a daily basis is how I can honor the legacy of my teammates who are no longer here. And so I don't know what that looks like for you. That might be, you know, for me, I can get real crystal clear on that because I literally think of particular guys that were friends of mine who I served with in combat who are no longer here, who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms and for our way of life. And when I got into some of the darkest times of my post-military time, thinking about why me, or why them and not me, why was I spared? How did I come through that fiery furnace, that hellhole, that darkness? How did I come through physically unscathed? Certainly not mentally or emotionally, but how did I come through that and survive? I was in the very same places, in the very same firefights. And I reconciled to be that, well, I was saved for a purpose and for a reason. And then to further extrapolate that, for those of you who say, well, gosh, I never served, or I didn't do that, or I didn't have friends that died. That's bullshit. This is just how I've defined it for me. This is how I've been able to connect the dots and reconcile how I'm not going to leave anything on the table. Because when I leave something on the table, I bring dishonor to the sacrifice of the men and women who are no longer here to have a life to live. I have a life to live. You have a life to live. Maybe you can connect to that story just to think about the sacrifices that those men and women have made, and that when you don't give it everything you've got, and when you don't feel like making a freaking phone call, like seriously, like pick up the damn phone and make a call. Those guys don't even have a hand to pick up and make a phone call. There are veterans back here who maybe would love to have a hand to pick up the phone. Like, really? Like, pick up the effing phone is what I want to say to you, and dial the damn numbers. And get a little angry at yourself at how much you're taking for granted. What would an immigrant to this country doesn't even know where his next meal's going, what would they give to sit in your chair, to have access to your database in a climate controlled room? Instead, they're out there swinging a sledgehammer. But they would trade places with you in a second. What are you leaving on the table? What would someone else give to have what you have, the opportunity that you have? And that's the kind of thoughts that go into my mind. I can't make a phone call? Come on.
Bro, what you said was so powerful. And I listened to this podcast. It's been a while. I should have re-listened to it before this call. But guys, what Andrew said was just so powerful. And for those of you, I recommend you listen to this podcast. This is with Jocko interviewed Andrew, and they talked about, fallen hero, Mikey Mansour. Bro, that was super powerful. And while I am not qualified to comment, or even to me, what you guys do for our country and for the people that have sacrificed, it's like all we could do is be our best. But I think your challenge was on point. Figure out your why. And I would say for the last 5-ish minutes that we really don't get tactical. We just talk about how to build that why, that personal why to be your best. And, obviously you just took a big swing at the bat there, Andrew, and you definitely emotionally connected with me. Todd, any thoughts from that, or any advice you have as we wrap up today's call on how to get a bigger why to become that, ultimate, self?
Well, it's so hard to follow that, Andrew. What a story. And I've seen Andrew talk through that day with Mikey Mansour, live, and it's got to be one of the most compelling stories, out of recent history. And I think you're right, Dave. It's about your personal why. You got to figure it out. I mean, Andrew just said, get a little angry at yourself for what you're taking for granted. And I think that's, the weird part about the mortgage business is that it's easy to make a decent living doing a half-assed job. And you've got to figure out what it is that's going to help your fire go. So you talking about the why piece is critical. We've done a ton of calls on it here in this productivity mastermind group. I mean, that's one of the things. You've got the mortgage coach why worksheet that you and I and the original group of productivity mastermind folks created. So I would spend some time on that, because in the end, I mean, if you heard what Andrew said, is he wants to honor those who have lost their lives. And so his why is just so deep, and it's so amazing compared to what most of us have been through, right? I mean, I haven't been through that, so I can't, for a moment think that I can resonate with it. But, for me, my personal why comes around the legacy I want to leave. And I've got a why around my family, and I've got a why around Win by Noon, right? Helping people reach their potential in business and life, whatever they feel that to be. And so if you know what your why is and you can really dig in, then I think that that's critical. And it does start there. I mean, in the end, you're not going to wake up and say, hey, I'm going to hit this standard today that I set that's really high, if your why isn't strong enough. And so, you know, again, maybe Dave, we just circle back and in the next few weeks, try to do a call around why again. I think that might be good timing.
Yeah, no, I like that. So guys, anybody that's tuned in, we will have this posted in our YouTube channel by the end of the day. Give it a like. This is in our Facebook group, streaming live, and the recording will be available. If you're in Facebook and you got some value, you know, give us a like. Ask a question. You know, if you have questions, I know Andrew, you know, he wants good questions. Hey, I'll take any question from you guys. Post your comments, post your questions.
Ask anything you want. Just use your brain before you ask.
Boom, like that. So post a question, use your brain before you ask, and collaborate in the document we have. So Andrew, you took a full hour out of your time, and guys, this is a very busy human being that has to say no 100 times for every yes, and he said yes to this. So knowing that you are, you know, you're not only a mortgage professional, you are now a representative of Echelon Front. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up today's call, or anything we can do for the mortgage industry to get more value from Echelon Front? Any closing thoughts, brother?
You know, at Echelon Front, where I'm a leadership instructor, that's what we do. We teach the lessons from combat and how that applies to business and life. So if your team or your company is looking for more ways to enhance leadership within your organization, that's everybody, by the way, we give practical applications and how-tos on doing that. So keep us in mind for that. You can go on echelonfront.com, or you can find me online and email me. Dave can give you my info, but
there'll be a link down below. We'll
below.
Google it.
Google it. Now look, on the why piece, I had to go through a significant amount of pain to get to that level of clarity. So it's not going to just happen overnight. You're not going to just sit down with a piece of paper and just, I found my why. Maybe you will. In the meantime, while you're trying to discover that, just do it. Just execute. Stop being a total whiny, worthless sack, and just do it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And stop making excuses. Say no to these people who are distracting you. Get clear on what's productive and what's not. And just decide in that moment to execute while you wait for the why. Some of you have got it already. In the meantime, just execute.
I'm not going to say another word. Boom. Great call, guys. Hope you got value. Todd, let's figure out how we're going to keep this conversation going. Any closing thoughts from you, Todd? But I have nothing to say.
You know, I think a mic drop. That last 45 seconds, I'm just going to record that, and I'm just going to play it over and over and over again. That was just awesome, Andrew. You just I think you just put a bow on this thing, and super grateful that you took the time. And, you know, this was a really fun conversation, and I look forward to seeing some chatter down here from those of you who are watching it live or watching the recording. And, you know, Dave asked some questions. I posted them in there. So let's keep this going on. And thanks for doing great things for our country, Andrew, and thanks for doing great things for this community.
Welcome.
And Andrew, thank you for your service to our country, brother. Have a good one. Take care.
Guys. Air 5.